Hello, once again, AP European Scholars, and we welcome you to another video lecture. I'm trying to kind of catch up on the things that we have been discussing since we've come back from Christmas break here in Unit 6. We have been looking at different ideologies that are emerging in the early 19th century, both in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution. Remember, the main ones that we have defined being politically, liberalism and conservatism being the two big ones there. Kind of philosophically, we talked about nationalism and romanticism and kind of the offshoots of those. And then economically, we've introduced capitalism and the offshoots of capitalism, then socialism and communism. So kind of knowing this and having these arrows in our quiver, we will take a look at kind of actual events, historical events, and changes that take place up through the year 1850. So we're looking at the end of the Napoleonic era in 1815 all the way through the revolutions of 1848 through 1850. So a lot to cram in here, but hopefully armed with the knowledge that we already have, you'll be able to keep up and be able to synthesize it and put it all together as we move forward through European history. Just a couple of reminders and suggestions. When we come to a new slide, I would encourage you to maybe pause the video and write down the notes and then come back and listen to me talk about it. We'll probably help you kind of synthesize it. You can add any notes that you might think are necessary. So without any further ado, let's dive right in here. We're going back to 1815, and we're going to start by looking at a map of Europe in 1815. We've looked at this map a couple of times in class, both before Christmas and post-Christmas. So remember that we now find ourselves in the reality of the five great powers. You see four of them in color here. France, as you can see in purple in the west, the state of Prussia in dark green, or darkish green in the eastern and western portions of Central Europe. Light blue, as you can see in the bottom of the map, is Austria, and what they have listed is the Austrian Empire, which you see is partly contained within the German Confederation. That's right here. Right, partly contained in northern Italy. As you can see, they control two Italian areas, Lombardy, which is this region here in central part of northern Italy, and then Venetia, which is over here to the east. That is the area surrounding the city of Venice. And then beyond the boundary of the German Confederation, you have these non-German speaking lands of the Austrian Empire. Up here you have Bohemia, nominally the Czech Republic and Slovakia today. Down here you have Hungary. Over here, this is Romania and kind of part of Bulgaria. And this area here even encompasses some of modern-day Ukraine. Russia, as you can see over here in orange, and what it was given after the fall of Napoleon, the Kingdom of Poland right here. And then Britain is not listed in a different color, but you can see it is, of course, the fifth great power. Britain is not, of course, a continental power, so its biggest land and influence is not just in European affairs, but is going on overseas. And then, of course, remember that we talked about some of the states that were created, right? The Kingdom of Sicily in the south of France, the areas of Savoy, and the island of Sardinia are added into a kingdom, as you can see right here, taken again away from France. Austrian Netherlands, which was located right here, was given to the greater Netherlands state, right? The Dutch living up here now control this entire northern region under a monarchy. The monarchy of Spain, the Bourbon kings of Spain, are restored down here as well. Okay, so remember that the way that we kind of organize our thoughts as we begin this section is that Europe in the post-Napoleonic era, at least the immediate post-Napoleonic era, is dominated by the conservative ideology, right? That it was these great powers, specifically Austria, Prussia, and Russia, with an assist from Britain, that are involved in creating the Congress of Vienna. And they all enter into an agreement to try to stifle revolutionary growth within these areas of Europe. And specifically, Austria, Prussia, and Russia create a specific alliance, which historians call the Holy Alliance between these three states, willing to use force if necessary to stop the spread of revolutionary ideologies in either their states or elsewhere. One other thing to mention is that France, which we see here, a monarchy is restored in France. One of the sons of Louis XVI is crowned as the new king of France, and France will be under a constitutional monarchy. The king will take the name of Louis XVIII. They skip Louis XVII because the young king, the oldest child, the Dauphin as he is known, who is the next in line to the throne, died in captivity after the death of his father, of Louis XVI, during the French Revolution. Two sons, Louis, who will be crowned Louis XVIII in 1815, survives the French Revolution, as does his younger brother Charles. Both of those guys will hold the crown of France in the period that we're talking about. All right, so the next slide is going to talk about kind of the resurgence of conservatism and how conservatism is utilized and kind of strengthened and holds a position of strength in the immediate aftermath of the fall of Napoleon. So on the top there, as you can see, is the kind of the agreement between the five great powers called the Concert of Europe, which says that no nation can take major action in international affairs unilaterally, and because the states that dominate this coalition are conservative, mainly Metternich and Austria and the state of Prussia as well, we're not going to see any, they're not going to allow any type of major expansion or desire to see any major changes within European affairs without kind of these countries agreeing together. Great Britain is actually going to, in many ways, kind of step out of this Concert of Europe. Britain will kind of maintain a conservative stance domestically. That means within Britain, especially prior to the 1830s, but will kind of become more liberal and more free trade oriented in international affairs. As a matter of fact, there are several revolutions that do take place in the aftermath of Napoleon. Almost all of those that are successful, though, are taking place in South America. And Great Britain used its diplomatic power to actually request that the states, the other European states, not intervene in South America, and to allow the South American revolutions to take place. And most of the European states agreed to kind of keep their hands out of it. And why did Britain do this? That's because Britain saw opportunities with the new creation of new states in South America, Gran Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, etc. Right, as they become independent, they'll be looking for trading partners, and they will become potential free trade opportunities for the British and for the young United States as well. Whereas the other European states at this point really have not industrialized, and so they're kind of more concerned with traditional international affairs. You see the second on the list there, it says the Carlsbad Decrees. This takes place in the Austrian Empire. So the Enlightenment, of course, is extremely important. And, you think about what happens on college campuses, right? Colleges are always a place of learning and of activism. And new ideas are first taught to many students while they are at university. And this was even the case within the German-speaking lands. A lot of students that were coming to Vienna and other Eastern European universities in the early 19th century have been introduced to the ideas of the Enlightenment. They're being introduced to new ideologies like liberalism and nationalism, and they begin to kind of feel led to follow these ideas, and they're becoming much more popular, especially among these student groups. These groups that they create political clubs and committees on college campuses in these European capitals, and those groups are called Burschenschaftens. You see how it's spelled there in on the slide. And Metternich, fearing that these groups may become catalysts for revolution or for calls for major reforms, does not trust them, and so he creates a series of laws, which are called the Carlsbad Decrees in the Austrian Empire, which outlaw them. Does not want them to become a big problem, and so using the power of the state to crush new political movements, a very kind of conservative move, at least of this early 19th century variety. In Great Britain, we also see a couple of examples of this. Again, this is all prior to 1830. In 1819, there was a movement in the city of Manchester where groups, mainly influenced by the rapid industrialization of Manchester, are looking to kind of increase workers' political opportunities, to gain the right to vote, to be able to create trade unions, to be able to organize together, which are all illegal by the government. And during this uprising, a group of troops actually shoot into the crowd, killing several protesters. The radical press in Britain calls this the Peterloo Massacre. It took place in an open space in Manchester called St. Peter's Fields. And so kind of taking the idea of Napoleon's last stand at the Battle of Waterloo, right? Some were hopeful, I think, that this would be, kind of traditional authorities' last stand in Britain, so they called it Peterloo. It certainly was not the traditionalist last stand in Great Britain, but it does usher in kind of this new age of political consciousness where even in peaceful, seemingly happy and content Britain, there is seeds of unrest, kind of because of this kind of new idea of political consciousness that common people, right, have a voice and deserve to be heard. Again, kind of coming out of the revolutionary ideology of the French Revolution. And kind of in response to the Peterloo Massacre, Parliament, which was controlled by the Tory party, passes what's called the Six Acts, which in many ways is stifling free speech, which again, they don't have a First Amendment in any European country, and so the government has the power to do this. And you see that it did not allow large meetings to take place, right? They didn't want another violent crowd to grow, so those were outlawed, right? If you were seen to speak out against the government, which would be called libel, or sedition, which is taking up arms against the government, you could be fined. And then it even gave the power for officials to search the homes of political agitators, again, using intimidation and the power of the state to kind of crush any type of dissent. In France, in I believe it was 1824, 1825, King Louis XV, who had been king for about 10 years, he dies, and his younger brother, Charles, is crowned as the King of France. He will rule France as Charles X. Now, when I show you this picture on the next slide, you'll kind of get an idea of kind of Charles's viewpoint of his position. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and I want you to go ahead and write down the points, and then I'll give a couple seconds to pause and then I'll begin talking again. So you can pause the video for a second if you wish. All right, so look at this illustration, this painting of Charles X, who, because we said, becomes king in the late 1820s. And hopefully you can see, other than his shorter haircut, right? Notice the robe, the gloves, the shoes that he's wearing, right? The crown that sits on the stool in front of him, right? That he fancies himself as an absolute monarch, right? If we were to use a word to describe him, it would be conservative, right? Traditional authority, right? He is certainly an antithesis, anti-French Revolution. Of course, when he was a young child, his family had been torn apart by the revolution. His father and mother had been executed. He had to kind of go into hiding, basically, to survive the revolution. And so when he came to power, he was looking to use the power of the state, the power of his government, to crush many of the ideas which had led to the destruction of his family. And so when he becomes king, as you see, he passes 4 laws. Now, he does this without going to the assembly, the National Assembly in France, which was known as the Chamber of Deputies. As you can see, he actually dissolves it, saying that he's going to rule without it and rule by decree, which is against the French Constitution at the time. He restricts the press and tries to take it over, right? Again, trying to limit criticism of his actions. France had expanded voting rights after the creation of the new constitutional monarchy. He restricts it to only the wealthiest citizens of France, and he calls for new elections, thinking that he is going to win the election. As it turns out, it backfires disastrously against him, and there will be a popular uprising in Paris that will spread throughout the country and will result in a revolution. All right, so this slide here is a kind of a springboard into the period of the 1830s and kind of the first wave of revolutions that moves across Europe during this time. As you might expect, France is the catalyst for many of these. As you'll see, there is a saying that was popular. Some credit it to Metternich, but no one knows for sure who said it. But the saying was, in the early 19th century, when France sneezes, all of Europe catches a cold. In other words, when something happens in France, there will be reactions, there will be repercussions all across Europe. And we see this, of course, we saw this during the French Revolution in the late 18th century. We saw this with the rise of Napoleon, the first decade of the 19th century. We'll see this in these revolutions of 1830, and then we'll see it again in 1848. All right. So next slide is going to kind of set this up. All right. So France, in this first half of the 19th century, is still going through a lot of change and tumult. All right, notice we have a picture of a new guy with a red sash. Notice his clothes are a lot different. His haircut is different. His clothing choices are different. This is the Duke of Orleans, who in 1830 is crowned as the new king of France, taking over for his cousin Charles X. All right, and so the Revolution of 1830 is going to lead and result in the ending of the Bourbon dynasty, the last Bourbon king, beginning, of course, the Bourbons going all the way back to Henry IV in the 1580s, ending with the abdication of the crown by Charles X. And then, so the new king of France will be Louis Philippe, Duke of Orleans, who will take the title of King Louis Philippe. All right, we call this the July Monarchy because the Revolution of 1830 begins in Paris in July against Charles X, he is overthrown, and quickly Louis Philippe kind of steps in, claims the throne, and again uh, submits to a new constitution, which is more liberal and a limited monarchy. So his power is incumbent upon again a new legislature that will be created. So the July monarchy, as you see, will last for 18 years, between 1830 and 1848, before a new wave of revolutions will be swept up. So this is just a quick synopsis. So the painting that we saw at the beginning of the slide, which was the Liberty Leading the People, is actually commemorating the revolution of 1830, the July monarchy. Louis Philippe becomes king, and he lasts, as we say, in 18 years until 1848, when his own monarchy will crumble. But we'll get to that a little bit later. But France sneezes in 1830, and so all of Europe, we will see repercussions for this. Now, the places where this happens are actually quite interesting. The first of these is going to be in the tiny country, or the tiny region of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which is called Belgium. All right. So Belgium is the southern part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So remember that when we started this a few minutes ago, we talked about the Kingdom of the Netherlands. We said it had been created as a monarchy by the Concert of Europe and the Congress of Vienna in 1815, that they had added territory which had once been part of the Austrian Empire and had been conquered by France. Right, it was called the Austrian Netherlands. Now it was under the control of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. All right, so almost immediately there were problems between these groups, and this is just some of the list of them. It says the Dutch and the Belgians are quite dissimilar. Right, they do not speak the same language. So the language of the north is Dutch. Right, that's what the Netherlands, they speak in the Netherlands. The southern Netherlanders, if you will, at this time, spoke a combination of French and Flemish. Right, the Flanders was a region of the southern Netherlands, and they spoke an entirely different language. So French and the Flemish in the south, Dutch in the north. Right, the Dutch were Protestants. The southern Netherlanders were Catholic. Especially the area of Belgium, it was very highly Catholic. And it says they're even focused on different occupations. The Dutch, remember, are primarily concerned with trade and shipping. The Belgians do not have many ports. They only have one port, the port of Antwerp, but it is largely dominated by the northern provinces. And so the Dutch had to develop something else, and that was industry. And so the cities of Belgium, where there were coal deposits, we're beginning to mine coal and beginning to build steam engines, and we had a very small and budding industrial revolution beginning by 1830. And so using the upheavals in France as a catalyst, the Belgians revolted against the Dutch and demanded independence. There were a few skirmishes and fights that took place, but eventually a compromise was met. Now, the other states of Europe stepped in, not wanting things to get too crazy, and so they agreed to allow the Belgians independence as long as they promised to be a monarchy. Right? They had to find a king, someone who would take the title of King of the Belgians. And it took them a while, but eventually they did find someone to take the throne. He was not Belgian. He was not from the Netherlands at all. He was actually from a Western German principality called Saxe-Coburg. He was a nobleman and had connections to other royal families. He was connected to the House of Hanover, which a kingdom in Western Germany, and had connections with the crown in England. During the time of Napoleon, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg, his name was Albert, had lived in England and was very popular. And it was actually the English that suggested Albert for this position. And so Albert of Saxe-Coburg was named as King of the Belgians and took the throne as Albert I in 1831. Now, he was Protestant. He had to convert to Catholicism to take the crown. And so that's how Belgium was created. So this is a successful revolution. And hopefully we can see this is not a revolution of liberalism, but it's really a revolution of nationalism. The Dutch and the Belgians recognized that they were dissimilar, and the Belgians were demanding, right, that they have their own unique kingdom to match their own unique identity. A second revolution broke out in Eastern Europe in 1830 as well, in the cities of Warsaw and Krakow, which are in Russian territory in the Kingdom of Poland. Poland looking also nationalism being the major catalyst, trying to, like the Belgians, create their own country. However, there were no friends to help the Poles, right? There were no British connections to this fight because of its distance far away. And so the Russians were able to use their might and the blessings of both the state of Prussia and the state of Austria to crush the rebellion. So the uprising in Poland is quickly crushed, and Poland, which is trying to reassert itself as an independent state after being wiped off the map in the late 19th century, will have to seethe and wait for later times. Okay, so as you can see now, we're going to jump ahead back into the tumultuous time for France. We're jumping 18 years to the downfall of Louis Philippe. So Louis Philippe had become quite unpopular, and there was several problems, and we're going to get into kind of the problems that were taking place throughout Europe in the 1840s. There was an economic downturn. There was bad harvest. There were just a series of events that took place that eventually led the people to rise up against Louis Philippe and sweep Louis Philippe from power. Considering the attempted restoration of the monarchy after the French Revolution, this revolution of 1848 in France will end monarchy in the country. And they will proclaim the Second Republic, the first being, of course, during the French Revolution in 1792. Here in 1848, the proclamation of the Second Republic, which will have again, an independent parliament and not a king, but a president. And in the presidential election, which will take place in 1852, the guy that wins the election is a guy named Louis Napoleon. He is the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, and he will become the new president of France. To be continued when it comes to that. So we're going to get more into detail now about the revolutions of 1848. Again, France has sneezed, and the rest of Europe is catching cold. So pause for a second and write down this part of the slide, and I will come back in about 5 seconds just to kind of give you some time. Again, just pause it and press play when you are ready. All right, so a lot to unpack in this slide, and so let's begin on the left side where it says the causes of the revolutions of 1848, and it says the liberal revolutions. In many ways, the revolutions of 1848 were kind of a culmination of the rise of liberal groups outside of Britain into new parts of Europe. So that was a big deal. Nationalism was a big deal. Also, the creation of industrialization. So let's first look at this. All right, so industrialization had slowly begun in Europe outside of 1830. Really, it's in France first and Belgium in the 1830s, and then later in places like Prussia and other parts of Germany that industrialization begins to emerge on the continent. Really, even by the late 1840s. Most of the continental Europe is still largely agrarian. But there had been the growth of a small middle class, right, who were sending their kids off to college and universities. They're becoming liberals, becoming free traders, beginning to question the traditional authority of the past, and looking for political reform. When you add into this the actual economic conditions of the 1840s, you can see that there was unrest not only in the politically active middle classes, the bourgeois classes, but also among the lower classes. The 1840s in Europe were called the Hungry 40s. Like the late 1780s, we saw right before the French Revolution, food prices had risen rapidly after a series of bad harvests, right, putting great pressure on the underclass people that lived within the cities that relied on food from the countryside. Food was becoming more expensive. Jobs were becoming more difficult to come by, which meant that the basic necessities, food and shelter, were very expensive. This made people angry, frustrated, scared, and longing for change. And so you kind of have this perfect storm. You have this longing for change and this fear among the working classes. You have the desire for political power and political voice among the middle classes of these Central European states where they don't have a voice because it's all controlled by the nobility and the monarchy. And then you have the rise of nationalism. You have the rise of these people who are saying if we just create unity, if we just use this idea of banding together, it's going to create something new, right? All three of these kind of things come together and push for a uprising and movement. And so when the revolution against Louis Philippe begins in France, throughout other big cities in Europe, when news reaches them that revolution has begun in France once again, they use that as a call for revolution in their own cities. And so places like Frankfurt and Berlin and Cologne and Krakow in Poland and Vienna, in Venice, in Rome, in Nice, in Milan, right? All these big cities throughout Central Europe. Paris, of course, we're going to see revolutions, uprisings against the authorities begin, right? And these are what we call the revolutions of 1848, all right? So let's look at the right side of it now. So there's, again, I'm going to show you a map. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and go now. So here's the map of these revolutions. You can see that almost all of them take place in Central and Eastern Europe. You see Budapest, you see Bucharest in Romania, you see there in Poland, you see Berlin in the Prussian state, you see Munich in southern Germany, Prague and Vienna, and Venice and Milan in Austrian Empire, right? So lots of uprisings, especially as you see there in Central Europe. And of course, the furthest west you see there is Paris, right, where everything began. And so all of these revolutions have a very specific cycle. So we don't have to get into a lot of detail about any of them, but we see kind of the same thing. First, we saw this coalition, this coalescing together of different ideologies: liberalism, radicals who want a republic and overthrow the monarchies, socialists who are just arising in these new industrializing areas, the poor and the workers who are looking for just relief from the terrible conditions that they're living under and the lack of food. They all are joining together to overthrow and to rebel against the existing order, right? All of them have some degree of success in bringing about change, right? For example, they actually overthrow Louis Philippe in France and establish a republic. In Austria, they actually are able to remove Metternich from office, right? Metternich had been around for 40 years as kind of the power behind the throne in Austria, as Austria's chief minister. He is forced into retirement in Vienna during the revolutions of 1848. The King of Prussia, Frederick William IV, he promises constitutional reform in his country. There's the proclaiming of republics in Milan and Venice. Right? There's even movement against the state of Russia in Poland. Right? And all of these promises and new beginnings, people are just feeling the euphoria, the excitement. And so by late 1848, this was becoming known as the springtime of the peoples. Right? Europe was finally rising up. The French Revolution that had failed in the beginning of the 19th century to move outside of France finally was going to see freedom and new opportunities, and the people themselves gaining power, right, over the traditional monarchies and nobility of Europe. We're finally going to succeed in 1848. As we look down to step 3, divisions very quickly begin to emerge. The first group that becomes satisfied are the middle class, the more liberal and moderate reformers. They say they are successful in either creating new constitutions or a promise of writing a constitution, which is what they want. Right? They want law and order, right? Because many of them are merchants or see opportunities in business, and so once they kind of gain political power and they achieve their political goals, they're satisfied. But the more radical groups, the socialists, all of those types of groups, they are not satisfied, and so there becomes divisions among the rebelling forces. And when the divisions pop up, the old order, which had just kind of been in disarray and disorganized, they're able to use this delay and this lack of unity among the rebelling classes to rise up again, to organize their armies, and one by one crush the revolutionaries, sending a lot of people into exile, capturing many and imprisoning them, executing others. And so ultimately by 1849 and 1850, most of the revolutions outside of Paris were failures. Right? They failed to achieve any permanent of their goals. Frederick William, after promising to create a new constitution, eventually says, I'm not going to do it. And the Prussians are able to use their army to crush rebellions in the cities of Germany. The Austrian emperor is able to crush the rebellions across the Austrian Empire. Russia is able to step in and take care of things in Poland as well. Really only Russia, which was too small and did not have a large working class. There were no major rebellions in any of the states or cities like St. Petersburg or even Moscow. And there was no revolution in Britain either, right? As it says, Britain was already making reforms, right? Britain was beginning the process of increasing suffrage, voting rights for males. In 1848, the People's Charter kind of reached its height, but they failed to kind of create any popular unrest. And Britain kind of proceeded peacefully. Britain is going to be the one country where there will be growing pains, but it will kind of slowly throughout the 19th century move towards what we would call a democratic parliamentary system. So again, looking at this map, the revolutions of 1848, the springtime of the peoples, it's a false spring, right? Conservatism will still reign supreme in most of Europe, especially in the areas of the Prussian Empire, Austria, and even in Russia as well. So, as we kind of end this lecture here, things are not looking good for liberal Europe and those that wanted change and people that wanted a further voice. But, as the saying goes, once the genie is out of the bottle, it's very difficult to put it back in. These forces have been unleashed, and one thing that is not going to stop in Europe is going to be progress. Industrialization is going to come slowly but surely into places like the northern Italy, into the Austrian Empire, into parts of Germany. And these elements are going to really begin to erode the power of these states. The rise of nationalism is going to be a huge issue for many of these conservative states. It's already beginning to show cracks within the Prussian Empire and creating opportunities for unity in Germany, which we will kind of talk about in the near future. So while the revolutions of 1848 were not successful, they are examples of how Europe is showing themselves to be ripe for change. And as we move into the second half of the 19th century, change will come to Europe, sometimes slowly, sometimes violently, but change will be coming nonetheless. And the Europe of the early 20th century up to the eve of World War I in 1914, the Europe of 1914 will look very different from the Europe of 1850 as we leave it. But that is a story for another day. I'm going to leave you with this chart, which kind of sums up a lot of what we've talked about here. Some revolutions that rose up in Europe in the post-Napoleonic period. We did not get into the nationalist revolutions of the early 19th century against the Ottoman Empire, largely because they don't fit into what we talked about now, but you can see that many of them were kind of nationalist rebellions against Ottoman rule. But that will open up a can of worms that we will talk about later. So I'm going to end our discussion with this chart. Make sure that you kind of understand it, see how it failed, see if there was any successes. But just understand the big ideas, the cycle, the causes of the revolutions of 1848, how coalitions were created, and how those coalitions split apart. That's kind of the big thing that you need to take away. And we'll reconvene soon and kind of move into the second half of the 19th century and see how Europe will continue to move towards the modern continent that it became, really the leaders of the world and kind of the crown jewel of the globe in the immediate period preceding World War I, when everything would be turned on its head. So until then, hope you guys are doing great, and I will talk to you soon.